As I was reading, I've told this story on the podcast before, so I won't take long with it. But I was pre-pandemic. I was substitute teaching part of the time as a way to research for writing about young people.
Mm.
Let me show up and talk to the young people. Um, and I had the experience of teaching a class, and we did a school shooting drill. And the class had been in a shooting the year before, the class that I was with. And so we had to be very careful. They were immediately traumatized. Some had to leave the room, go with a counselor. And
Mhm.
I thought, well, okay, I have this connection, so I feel I feel not a relationship, but I think I understand Lucy because of that experience. I feel something, and it occurred to me that this is America. I imagine a lot of readers, unfortunately, across the country are going to have some kind of experience.
I think sadly everybody who's old enough to read this book has an entry point. And that was something that came up a lot. I think I've alluded to this, but let me just say this was a really hard book to sell. There were a lot of editors who read it and said, gosh, this is a beautiful book. This is a great story, blah, 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 blah. I can't handle it. It's too sad. I personally don't want to deal with it, which I get, because when for those of you listening, I think all of your listeners probably understand publishing, but for anybody who doesn't know publishing, once you sell a book, you're looking at probably 1.5 to 2 years between acquiring it and when it actually gets published. So when editors and all the team working on it agree to buy a book, they're looking at living with this material for a long time. So I do respect the fact that sometimes an editor will have to say, I am not prepared for one reason or another to live with this for the next 2 years of my life. But we did get a lot of that. And then the biggest pushback was a lot of editors said, I don't think, do you want to rewrite this as YA? Because I think high schoolers are talking about this, but middle schoolers are not talking about this. This isn't a topic for them. And at the time, my daughter was in kindergarten and they were having active shooter drills at school. So I was very aware that even kids as young as 5 years old, and even younger, depending on, pre-K and nursery school and stuff like that, young kids were already going through active shooter drills. We're already coming home with questions and language around this issue that maybe they didn't fully understand or didn't know how to process. And so to me, middle school felt almost like on the later side of discussing this and bringing this up to kids, because as a parent, I was dealing firsthand with the reality of having a school-age child in America. So that was very jarring to me at the time to have editors say, gosh, I don't think this is on middle schoolers' minds. And I think there's a certain degree of wishful thinking, and I'm guilty of it too. I think we as grown-ups want to sometimes protect kids by not bringing up an issue that is really hard. And I think we've all learned from one experience or another that kids are far more perceptive and far more aware than we sometimes think, and that they really come to these situations with an openness and a gratitude for the discussion being started, whereas we come to it with a lot of baggage and assuming that it's going to be hard or sad for them. And a lot of times kids just want an entry point for a discussion. And I've certainly found that with this book, that kids tend to be really one of two reactions, which is, oh, thank goodness somebody's talking about this so I can ask my questions, or curious of like, oh yeah, I do wonder about that, and it's interesting. I'm grateful to have this conversation starter. Whereas adults tend to bring to it sort of the weight of the world, because we've all experienced a lot of things, and we make the assumption that kids are bringing that level of gravity to it, whereas oftentimes they're coming in really just wanting to have a conversation.
But I do wonder, because we've got a generation now that will remember that during a raging pandemic, so many wanted them back in school immediately, and some were arguing, don't wear your mask, breathe on each other. We must have our right to bear arms at all costs, and if that means that we have to read about school shootings every week in America, that's just going to be the cost.
Right.
And I don't know what that looks like, but I know that is going to be that's something that's coming and is here.
Yeah.
I know that you're a member of a few different not gun advocacy groups. I know you're a member of Moms Demand Action for Gun
Yeah.
Sense in America.
Yeah.
and that you're actively involved in hoping to foster change. So who is the ideal reader for this story, and what is it that you're hoping they'll take away and possibly do as a result of having read it?
That is a fantastic question. My ideal reader is really families or classrooms, because I believe that this is the kind of book that kids should be reading, but they shouldn't read it totally unsupervised or on their own. I believe my hope is that this is a conversation starter for kids. And of course, I am not a therapist and I'm not a doctor, but what I have to offer to this cause is as a storyteller and a conversation starter. So it's my hope that kids will read this and have discussions with their parents about it, or with their teachers or a librarian or somebody in their life who can offer them a safe space to ask questions or to have a conversation that maybe otherwise they wouldn't have started. So it's my hope that adults will read this book too. I think also because, you and I both have just, said how we have thought about what it's like to be a kid today by virtue of our, writing for kids. But I think there are some adults who haven't had the opportunity to think about the issues that face kids today in their entirety and what it's like to actually, live in this version of America. So I hope it's also an entry point for some adults to put themselves in kids' shoes and think about what kids might be really facing and thinking about. And what I hope people will do as a result of reading this book is sort of threefold. There are three organizations that I'm really passionate about. One is, as you said, is Moms Demand, which a lot of their focus is on the legislative change around gun laws, safe storage, legislating safety, background checks, all sorts of things like that. I really admire the work they're doing in that vein. And then another organization I really love and admire is the Sandy Hook Promise. And their focus is really sort of more of the preventative take on gun violence, which means fostering empathy, recognizing people who are having trouble, teaching kids to be kind, to look for the signs, to, think ahead. And then the last organization that I really love is called the Honor Grace Project, which, like the Sandy Hook Promise, was founded by parents of a child who was killed in the Sandy Hook massacre. And that focuses really on trauma recovery, therapy, providing resources for kids who have been through traumatic incidents, whether it's a school shooting or something else. But I think those are the three things that I hope kids get out of this book. And of course, not everybody needs to be involved in all three of those areas, but I'd like to offer three options of there are ways that if you read this book and you're moved by it and you want to see change, there are so many people out there doing wonderful things. And so it's my hope that kids will see that there are all sorts of options, and no matter what your gift is or your ability to do something about it, there are lots of different ways to affect change. I wrote an article about this recently and really put some thought into sort of the question of how to talk to kids about hard things. And I would say there's 3 H's. The first one is honesty. Be honest. It doesn't mean you have to tell the whole story. It doesn't mean you have to pull aside a 4-year-old and discuss the nitty-gritty of, that you, in an age-appropriate way, you want to be honest with the kid. The second thing is to offer some kind of hope, which I like to quote Mr. Rogers, look for the helpers. In any crisis, you can always see the people who are rushing to do good. And that's where those gun violence prevention advocacy organizations come in, where I provide the kids with hope. There are people out there working on it, and you can too. And then the last thing is help, which is either offer the kid a way that they can help in the cause, because it's really empowering to get involved in some kind of advocacy, whether it's policy change or raising money or getting involved in, helping people process and recover. But offering them an opportunity to be a helper or to get help. Sometimes, the help stands for like offering the kid an opportunity for therapy or for a group or a guidance counselor or something. So honesty, offer them hope, and offer them help to either be a helper or to receive help. Because I think kids are just, especially with the internet, they are aware of so much more than we want them to be or than we think they are. And the best thing we can give them is honesty and the full story. So I hope that by writing this book, I'm contributing to that and giving them honesty and also providing them with ways to carry on from it, not leaving them hanging. I think particularly the Honor Grace Project is such a great resource for kids who maybe read this book and say, oh gosh, I have more questions, or I have more issues, or I want to know more. There are resources out there made by mental health professionals who know better than I how to actually guide kids through this. But it's my hope that Aftermath is a conversation starter.